We often talk about lore in connection to fantasy books, for example. We talk about lore when it comes to mythology and to legends. We don't do it as much when we talk about religion because lore maybe sounds a bit, for younger people or for kids, or it's at least imagined, and religious stories are stories people believe in. But if we really think about it, lore is something that humans have been doing all since the dawn of humanity, because we are in need of stories. We are in need of understanding how we came to be and how the world we live in came to be, and we have to have explanations for thunder and for rain and for war and for death. Why does that happen? Lore is part of creating culture and explaining culture, and it's extremely central for us who really love fantasy or sci-fi or mythology, because the deeper the lore, I suppose, the deeper the interest we'll get. Most of us who are here in the community and you follow the channel, maybe you are a niche reader like myself, so to speak, that it's not the thing you find in the ordinary store, maybe Malazan Book of the Fallen, but here you can find it where I'm sitting, and you can feel the community. I'm asking a question here: what lore is worth reading? And especially for us lore seekers, what makes lore interesting? And there are thousands of fantastical stories, if we talk about fantasy, out there, but there are only a few who reach through the filter to us who are very interested in lore. And so I was asking myself, why is that, and what has to be needed for us to really like the lore? I encourage you to comment, because you might have examples of books and lore and video games, of course, as well, that attracts you that I don't know about, or maybe I don't talk about here, but you think I should have mentioned that book or that game. So please do that. I think the lore, first of all, is something heavy. As I said, it has to do with the, explanation of why we are on Earth. Actually, why things happen on Earth, and why existential things happen, like life and death, for example. That is translated into the storytelling world, into books and to games, and also actually to board games. And I think to attract a lore seeker, if we talk about it as that, I mean then a person who maybe goes on Wiki to read about the game or the book he or she is reading. I think it has to be heavy, it has to be deep, it has to be felt inside your heart and soul, like immersion. And for those new to the channel, maybe new to fantasy, and this sounds maybe a little bit strange, we all know Lord of the Rings, for example. Here, everyone knows about that nowadays. It is lore heavy. It is tied to our history in the world, to the conflicts, and be good, evil, or maybe be in between. A lot of drinks has those kind of things, and it's probably attractive because of that. And Malazan Book of the Fallen, as I often talk about, and I see that you can see it here in the camera behind me, and obviously lore heavy, with the pantheon, with the gods, with the myths. I think the lore has to be felt like it's real, like it would be lore on Earth. Legends on Earth, culture on Earth, languages on Earth, mythologies on Earth. But you can't just rip those stories, like, let's say, ancient Greek mythology, to a fantasy book. Maybe for younger people you can do that. I think Percy Jackson is a lot of Greek mythology, and if I'm right, and my daughter read it, and she likes it a lot. I can imagine it's good. I haven't read it, but if you go to these heavy kind of fantasy ratings, like Malazan Book of the Fallen, Lord of the Rings, for example, I think those are the two heaviest out there. Dune is very heavy. If we talk about sci-fi too, it has not only to be ripped off from Earth mythology, you have to make it your own. And I I think both Tolkien and both Stephen Erickson does that in a very, very good way, even though both are obviously inspired by, in Tolkien's case, Germanic mythology, Finnish mythology, Norse mythology, for example, and it's the Iliad and Odyssey, I would say, in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, a lot, especially the Iliad. We need to have this depth of the religion, the faith, the mythology. The stories has to have been there before we came into the story, because that's part of the immersion. That goes also with games. If we take Oblivion or Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls, and we have Pillars of Eternity, which I used to talk about sometimes. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow, that game. So the mythology and the pantheon and so on, and the stories can't feel like a repetition. Then it becomes too easy for the reader and for the gamer. So trustworthy mythology is very important. I also think that the characters has to be trustworthy in the meaning that we have to, we have to be able to imagine that we were in the story, that we got on this heroic quest, like Frodo does in Lord of the Rings, for example. That we feel like he felt, a bit confused maybe, but also excited for the adventure. Also a bit thrown into the story because it doesn't know everything, but we as readers, we know a lot of things. Still, we as readers don't know everything in the world of Lord of the Rings when we start the book. So we also become curious to learn more, to read companions, for example. There is a Tolkien bestiary, for example. That goes along with the Dark Tower, for example, where we have in Stephen King, where we have Jake, the main character, the little boy, and also Roland Deschain, for example. Those two also are thrown into the story. They don't know so much about their adventure. We know, but there's a lot of things we don't know, and that creates this interest, I think, for lore. So I suppose we like lore. We are a kind of explorers. We like to delve into stories a lot. Lore, as I said in the beginning, is connected to our real world. This is the Amar Chitra Katha. That is the comic books in India. These are older. That describes different religious stories, or you could say religious lore, if you understand me right. So this is about Elephanta Island. It's outside Mumbai. It's an island with rock-cut temples, Shiva temples, for example. I'll show you some pictures here that you can see. So the stories here is obviously lore. It's lore because it shapes the culture, and but you can also find these kind of stories in a fantasy story as well, then made up, of course. I talked about that with Reverend J, the contemplative reader. What's the difference between real religious stories and it's fantasy and so on. Well, please watch the movie if you haven't done that. Maybe you can get a new perspective there. We also have The Witcher. As many of you know that I'm reading it right now. We have the character here, like Frodo, but not the same way. The Ciri, for example, the young girl. She doesn't know where she's going really. She knows she has this, mysterious powers, you could say, magical powers, but she is very much like just a small girl. Obviously, that will change later in the book. So the hero's journey then seems to be very important in, for us who love fantasy and who love lore and also mythology. We also have the main characters as well. They can be humans, they can be gods, but we need them as well. And this sense of mystery, of course. And as I said, we have to be able to dive into things. Here's the road to Dark Tower. This is the exploring Stephen King's Magnus Opus. I usually don't talk about Dark Tower. Please tell me if you want to. And then you have lore in other senses as well that makes it attractive, because it can be like that. That it's something we can read a lot about, but it can also be things that just opens up a lot of things. I think the comics here with the Batman. This is the year one is one example, because as you know the Batman stories are very inspired by, and all the superheroes you could say, by mythology and by pantheon. So this is not a long shot at all. If you're new here, maybe it sounds strange to talk about the Iliad and you talk about Batman here, and then I talk about The Witcher and Malazan and so on. No, this is not a long shot. It's very much connected. If you haven't this one, it's really good, and it's with Batman and the comics. It's in the way that there are different authors and they shape the stories, so it's not like Lord of the Rings or anything like that. We also have lore, of course, in the Sanity series, Empire of Silence, and we have it in Dune as well. Same thing. I mean, maybe one typical thing with lore in books is that you have this appendix. Now it's a bit too bright on the camera, but in the end of the book you have an appendix. It's called the Index of the Worlds, and then you have I can read about all the people in Sanity series and all the planets. It goes the same with Dune, for example. Similar thing here in the book. I think this kind of academic approach to reading, you could say, is very important when we talk about lore, and why. I mean, when we judge if lore is worth reading. I don't know if you agree about this, or if this is too much, or is it too academic, or is it too unrelaxed in a way of reading. For me, I'm a little bit of studying when I'm reading. I really enjoy that aspect of reading, and it makes me get away from all the ordinary things. That life can be fun, but it can also be a bit of a struggle. So I think that immersion helps me to just move away from everything bad maybe that is happening, or sad things that are happening, or just when you're tired you want to get energy. So this gives me a lot of energy. Actually, not only when it comes to lore as well, it's not only the legends, the myth, the characters, and the places. Of course, the geography is very important too. The temples or the churches, if it's The Witcher, it's more like churches maybe. The magic, it has to be believable. It has to be lived before. We have to feel like it's like 1,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago. If the author or the game director cannot create that kind of feeling, I suppose the lore won't click, at least not for me. How is it for you? Do you like easier lore to speak, so to speak, or do you want this in-depth lore? As I've been showing and talked about here for a while. I'm just checking my notes to see if I forgot something. It doesn't seem like that. So I want to hear your thoughts on lore. What lore is worth reading? I want to have suggestions from you with books and maybe games that you read or play that is lore heavy, or that where you think the lore is great. Maybe you have other examples where lore is not so heavy but it's good, maybe like Narnia, for example, or maybe Harry Potter as well is a great lore in its own right and for the purpose it serves. So please tell me, and we will see each other very soon. It's weekend. I'm recording a few videos here, a book review, and I will talk about Pillars of Eternity a little bit tomorrow. So until then, have a nice day. It's beautiful weather here in Sweden. I hope you have that too. Bye. Thank you.